Hello and welcome to the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. My name is Lori Lumbie and I am the pastor and spiritual director of this online virtual community. Let me take a moment to read to you from our mission statement. We are a community of men and women who consider Jesus to be our teacher, while honoring the spiritual truths inherent within all sacred traditions. We recognize the divine as that which is at once outside of us, within us, and present within all of creation, and a divine which can be acknowledged by any name, image, or presence. We believe in the inherent potential of all human beings to become self-actualized and acknowledge the spiritual journey as a formative tool in this endeavor. We believe in the law of love and seek to know more fully the love of the divine that dwells within us and which seeks to be known in the world through us, in service to the betterment of the world. Let us pause for a moment in silence as we allow ourselves to be open in mind and heart to God's spiritual nourishment for us today. Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya, Avundeva Shemaya. In this week's gospel, we had an opportunity to hear the story of the sower and the seed. There are several stories of sowers and seeds in the Christian scripture. In this particular story, we hear the parable of the sower who sowed good seed in the field. And when the sower was asleep, his enemy came and planted weed among the good seed. The question was then posed to the sower, are we supposed to rip the weeds out to keep the seed, to allow the seed to grow and to thrive? And in the sower's infinite wisdom, the sower said, no, leave the weeds where they are and allow them to grow up among the seeds. And then at harvest time, we will deal with separating the weed from the seed and its fruits. This is ultimately a story about God, about the way in which God has created us. Each and every one of us is created perfect, like the wheat seed, full of potential and full of promise and abundant in our manifestation. When the wheat seed that we are is planted in good soil and is provided with proper shelter, light, water, and protection, it can't help but thrive and thrive abundantly. This is God's intention for each and every one of us, that we grow in abundance and that we not only survive in this life, but also thrive. And thriving in this human experience means finding our gifts, finding the unique way in which each and every one of us has been called to be God's love in the world, and to thrive in such a way that we find meaning, purpose, and fulfillment through our own unique giftedness. And in the abundant sharing of our gifts, we contribute to the nourishment, support, ongoing growth, and thriving of the human species. Not only that, but we contribute to the thriving of all of creation. The challenge is that in choosing the human condition, not only are we blessed with the seed, but we are also blessed with the weed. Now, often when this reading is presented or interpreted, the weeds are looked upon as our sinfulness, the ways in which we have turned away from God. But God knows better than this. The seed, or the weed, is the consequence of the human condition. And the consequence of the human condition is such that we have temporary perception of separation from God, from the love that we are, and from the beauty that God made us to be. This is the consequence of the human condition. When we are in that place of perceived separation, we know fear. And when we know fear, we act out in non-loving ways. The non-loving ways in which we act out could be construed or interpreted as sin. These are the symptoms of our perceived separation from God. But God does not deny us this experience of separation, neither does God deny us the experience of the behaviors that arise out of this perception of separation. Along with that, we can also look at the weed as being the parts of ourselves that we are tempted to reject. Each of us are created as magnificent, perfect human beings in the eyes of God. The challenge is that there are weeds, if you will, inside of us with which we sometimes struggle. Some of the weeds that we struggle with might be depression, anxiety, panic attacks, compulsive thinking and worrying, perfectionism, self-righteousness, judgment, sloth, laziness, the desire to withhold our gifts, and the list goes on and on. Each and every one of us has qualities and behaviors within us that we are sometimes tempted to judge as condemnable, or things that we resist or reject within us. These are also the weeds. But again, God does not say, I'm depriving you of depression. I'm depriving you of self-rejection. I'm depriving you of self-righteousness. Instead, God understands that all of these things, our fears and our personality and behavior traits that we are often tempted to condemn, all have the opportunity for serving a higher purpose. In other words, all of these qualities within us, the fearful and the things that we judge as imperfect, help to serve our growth. I know for myself, as a recovering perfectionist, that depression and anxiety are two of the big imperfections that I have been judged to condemn, trying to push them away, make them go away, find ways to medicate or sedate them. Instead, what God has invited me to do, and what I think God is inviting all of us to do, is to look at these perceived imperfections as opportunities to grow. How can we use these traits, these weeds, if you will, to help us become more loving, more compassionate, more empathetic, more merciful, more humble? These are the qualities that help us to grow, that help us to find and remember our oneness with God. Because it is often in our greatest struggle that we finally give up our human pride and seek God for help and assistance and support. And when we do that, when we seek God's help for the weeds within us, then we grow. More importantly, we grow towards the potential that God planted within us. We grow toward our purpose. We grow toward an experience of meaning and fulfillment in our lives. If it weren't for the weeds, we might not look any further. We might simply be content in our prideful selves. But because of the weeds, we are forced to seek. So this week, I invite all of us to be attentive to the weeds within us. What are the fears and the compulsions that arise out of those fears? What are the characteristics or personality traits that we have within ourselves that we are tempted to condemn? Instead of condemning our fears, our compulsive behaviors, our personality traits and qualities, instead of condemning them, how can we look through them toward God? How can we invite God to help us to see the way in which these things can serve us as gifts? Help us to grow. Help us to become more fully our most authentic selves. Thank you for joining us this week for the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. And if you found this service to be meaningful and supportive, please share it on your social networking sites. And if you found this to be supportive of your own spiritual growth and nourishment, please consider making a donation to Authentic Freedom Ministries. Thank you, and have a great week.